Yeah.
And now, our feature presentation.
Moving along in the program, I'd like to give you all a synopsis of what has been taking place on this campus amongst the believers since I say about 2007. Having taken careful notice of the absence that exists in society at large, but more specifically on the campus of Howard University, that is the absence of an effective organization whose sole mission is to restore black people and humanity back to divine glory. It is in that spirit that the Nation of Islam Student Association has reestablished itself on Howard's campus. There has been irrefutable evidence of the capability of the teachings of Islam as taught by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad to remedy the disease of white supremacy and reverse the behavior of one engaging in self-destruction. Operating in the midst of a dissatisfied populace, the Nation of Islam has rightfully earned a strong reputation for teaching and practicing pride, love, respect, protection, cleanliness, and a thorough knowledge of self. Howard University, at this particular dispensation of time that we are now living in, ought to become the real Mecca of not only black education, that of education in general. And if the nation's presence on this campus can aid in this process, then all credit should be given to the Supreme Being, God, Allah, the Most High. It is His humble yet mighty hopes of the NOISA to help to serve the student body by producing leadership, not followers, not slaves, not Negroes, not coons, but leadership that is inspired to build and establish institutions that will work to dignify black and oppressed people all over the planet. The only requirement, of course, to join the NOISA as a patron is to be committed to actively supporting the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his representative, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and the Nation of Islam. Despite alleged claims, you read in the media, it said Nation of Islam, we never supported, Jews, we're anti-Semitic, or we hold disgraceful beliefs. I want you today to listen, to give some ear service to what we have to say, and you will see by the end of this meeting that none of this is true. The universal teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad under the guidance of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan will serve the students on Howard's campus regardless to race, creed, class, or color. And moving along in the program, I want to bring up a brother who's very dear to me. We're both from New Jersey. I knew this brother back when we were younger men, we're still young. Younger men at Mosque number 25 back in Newark, New Jersey. And I used to see brother in the meetings, paying attention, listening with the other young brothers. And, I really, we was, talk, we exchanged, greetings of peace, but it wasn't until 2007 when I had seen brother on campus. I had just came back from a study abroad from Morocco, so my faith was real charged up. And I saw a brother, he said, it's time to get to work. It's nation time. We need to start building this nation back on campus. And this brother I speak of is this illustrious brother, Brother Jalil Muhammad. And he's going to bring us into our next program on the campus today. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, brother.
Alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Good to see everyone out on a Saturday morning. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, the one true God to whom all praises are due, the Lord of the worlds. We thank Allah for intervening in our affairs and coming in person, in the person of Master Farad Muhammad, traveling 9,000 miles from the holy city of Mecca, raising one up from among our midst as a divine leader, teacher, and guide, the one that we have come down to know to be messenger of Allah, but one that we know now to be so much more, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And we thank them both for the first right fruit of their union. Our friend, our brother, our champion in the cause of freedom, justice, and equality. The greatest brother that we have in our midst, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And in their names and in the names of the righteous from the beginning of time until now, we offer unto you and extend the greeting words of peace and paradise. We say in the ancient Arabic salutation, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sir.
And how's everyone doing this morning?
Well, sir.
Brothers and sisters, it's indeed a pleasure to see you all out on a Saturday morning after what Obama calls Snowmageddon. I think that's what he called it. But we know that snow don't stop nothing. Snow don't stop the black man from doing what needs to be done. And snow doesn't stop the spread of truth. Is that right or wrong?
That's right.
We can't stop because it's snowing. We can't stop because it's raining. We can't stop because it's thundering. We have to thunder truth. Is that right or wrong?
That's right.
We have to spread the truth regardless to whom or what. And so today, although we are few in numbers, we are high in spirit. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Are you high in spirit?
Yes, sir.
Are you happy to be here today?
Yes, sir.
You could have been any other place in America. You could have been in the bed eating a ham sandwich, but you are here at Blackburn Center about to hear a message from Brother True Islam. Give yourselves a round of applause. The Holy Quran opens up, brother and sister. The first commandment that Almighty God Allah gave to Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was to read, Iqra. The 96th surah of the Holy Quran is entitled The Clock. And it reads as follows: In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, read in the name of thy Lord who creates man from a clot. Read in thy Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he knew not. The black man has been dead to the knowledge of himself for 400 years. He has been dead to the knowledge of others for 400 years. He was enslaved by his enslaver, enslaved master for 400 years and robbed of the knowledge of himself, robbed of the knowledge of his enemy, robbed of the knowledge of the sciences of nature, robbed of the knowledge and the love of himself and the love of his fellow brother and sister. But the scripture says, I will raise that people up, and the last shall be the first, and the first shall be the last. For 150 years ago, you were enslaved, and we were inhibited from reading. We were prohibited from writing. And if they found one among us who knew how to read, who knew how to write, they would kill him. And if they didn't kill him, they would ostracize him from the rest of the community. Allah commanded Prophet Muhammad to read, although he was illiterate. And Allah has commanded the black man and woman to read. Any people that do not read lack development.
That's right.
The highest form of reading, the highest form of writing is scholarship. And you know that you're dealing with an astute civilization, an astute society, and an astute people when you find scholarship among them. I'm very happy to say that we are growing and developing into an astute people. We are growing and developing into the people of Almighty God. How do you know? Because scholarship is among us.
Yes, sir.
And the greatest scholar that is among us is the most honorable Elijah Muhammad and the honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And they have wonderful students. And one of their greatest students among us is a brother, a little brother that you may not know. But by the time the presentation is finished, you will know him very well. Because he is a brother that you should take very seriously. He is a brother who is academically dissecting the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And there's nothing wrong with dissecting the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teachings are true.
Go ahead.
And any time you dissect truth, you only get more and more truth from it. And so we thank Almighty God Allah for our brother, Dr. Wesley Muhammad. Give him a well-deserved round of applause. Dr. Wesley Muhammad is the founder of Truth of God Institute, an educational research and resource center committed to providing scholarly and scientific discussion of the mother of all questions, who is God. That is the mother of all questions. There are secondary questions, and then there's a primary question. And all of the secondary questions serve as a foundation for the primary question. Some of us are asking the question, why are we in this condition? Others ask the question, are we ever going to get out of this condition? Some people ask the question, what is the true religion of God? Other people ask the question, who am I? What is my purpose in life? So these are all secondary questions. The primary question is, who is God? Dr. Muhammad earned a BA in Religious Studies from Morehouse College as well as a master's degree and a doctorate in Islamic studies from the University of Michigan. He is the author of various books. I became introduced to brother through his work. His very first book, an encyclopedia proving that the black man was God. And when I saw my brother reading it, I got a little suspicious, I must say. Because I said, I didn't see this published in the Final Call newspaper. What is this? And my brother said, you really need to read this book because this book is dissecting and academically analyzing the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And after about 2 or 3 weeks after the brother finished the book, he allowed me to read it, and I read the introduction. And it was over from there. You will enjoy this brother's presentation, and most of all, you will learn. With no more from myself, please receive our dear beloved brother, scholar, friend, Dr. Wesley Muhammad.
In the name of Allah, who came in the person of Master Muhammad, whom all holy praises are forever due, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that the most honorable Elijah Muhammad is his living and yet exalted Christ. I further bear witness that in his absence and by the permission of Allah, that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan sits in his seat today as a divine reminder to us all. In their names, I greet you, family, brothers and sisters, in the greeting words of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Brother Jalil, to Brother Askia, it is a humbling honor to share an event with you, beloved, and to speak about Islam in Black America. Then I can think of few other contributors to that discussion than Brother Askia. Thank you, beloved. I won't be long. My subject is the African origin of Islam. I have been on this subject for a little while now, such that some have raised the question, why am I still on this subject? Why is it necessary in 2010 to discuss the African origin of Islam? It is my belief that in 2010, the black community is in a worse condition than we were 40 years ago.
Yes, sir.
It is my belief, it is actually my fear, as a father, a black father in America, 2 black children, a 10-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy, whom I will raise in the community in which I was born, the black community. But it is a community beset with multiple pathologies.
Yes, that's right.
Pathologies that have not gotten better, have gotten worse. And I lament the community that my children will inherit. In that regard, I am convicted that Islam, in particular, the Islam as taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, has medicinal value. It's medicine that can actually heal at least some of these pathologies.
Yes, sir.
That can actually better the community. But medicine, all medicine, regardless of its healing power, if not taken in a proper dose,
We just want to make sure the sound is working.
is this better?
Yes, sir.
All medicine, regardless of its medicinal or healing power, if not taken in a proper dose, if not taken according to the strict guidelines of the prescriber, will have minimal effect. It is my belief that there are those with a vested interest in keeping Islam, the medicinal Islam, or the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, away from those who need it most, away from the patient. Who would want to keep Islam from black people?
Good question.
Yathrib Stoddard, very important 20th century political scientist. He was influential as a political scientist in the 1920s. He was also a Harvard-trained historian. He was trained in Islamic studies. And in around 1921, published an important work, The New World of Islam. Stoddard's primary fame, or infamy, as the case may be, is his work as a white supremacist. Stoddard published an influential work, 1924, The Rising Tide of Color Against White Supremacy. As a trained historian, as a political activist, and as a committed white supremacist, Stoddard was aware of the fact that white supremacy by that time was on the decline. And the leading threat to white supremacy then, as now, is the rise of black humanity. So Stoddard analyzed the situation historically, the situation of the decline of white supremacy and its potential eventual replacement by a restored black humanity. And Stoddard made recommendations as a political scientist, made recommendations on how to arrest the decline of white supremacy. In his book, The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy, Stoddard, the Harvard-trained historian and political scientist, knowledgeable in the history of Islam, makes this observation. Concerning Islam's steady progress in black Africa, there can be no shadow of a doubt. Every candid European observer tells the same story. Mohammedanism, says Charles Eliot, can still give the natives, the native peoples of the planet, black folk, can still give the natives a motive for animosity against Europeans. What is it about Islam that gives black folk an animosity against white folk? What was Stoddard aware of? 20 years ago, another English observer, T.R. Threefall, wrote, quote, "The rapid spread of militant Mohammedanism among the tribes to the north of the equator is a serious factor in the fight for racial supremacy in Africa. The scramble of Africa, the fight to control Africa, at some level became a racial war. And it was evident to those involved on one side of the aisle that Islam in Africa was a serious factor in that fight, that racial fight. Stoddard goes on to say, Islam as yet is unknown south of the Zambezi, but white men universally dread the possibility of its appearance. Let's reflect on this for a moment. A very important political scientist, Harvard-trained historian, trained in cultural history, and trained in the history of Islam in particular, who happens to be a committed white supremacist, who has a vested interest in the sustaining of white supremacy and operates within circles of those committed to sustaining white supremacy that was on the decline. In his circles, he became aware of the fact that white men universally dread Islam in Africa. Why is Islam? Why do white supremacists with power, with a vested interest? I'm not talking about the trailer park white supremacists. I'm not talking about the picket team white supremacists. I'm talking about the white supremacists with power, with a direct investment in sustaining the development, the decline of white supremacy. Why would they dread Islam among Africans? What do they know about Islam in Africa that causes them to dread its appearance among African peoples? And what does that have to do with the current movement in America to make Islam, especially Islam with a black face, public enemy number one? We live in a post-9/11 world. When those towers came down in New York, a paradigm shift occurred with regard to Islam. It became abruptly politically correct to be anti-Islam. But Osama bin Laden was marched out, and though he wasn't as light as the white Arabs that we were used to seeing, no one really confused him with a black American. So the backlash for 9/11, the so-called immigrant Muslim community felt the burden of most of it. It was immigrant Muslims, it was the Arab male in particular that was the enemy of the state. But if you have been following the news of late,
yes,
or if you subscribe to Newsweek, you will see that the face has changed. The brother who allegedly plotted the bombing of the plane headed to Detroit, the Nigerian, on the cover of Newsweek. And Newsweek has announced that the new sons of bin Laden. And the brother looked like any one of us in here. And so the face of Islamic terror is no longer the white Arab male. The face of Islamic terror, the new enemy of the state, which was the old enemy of the state, is once again a black male. I won't get into all of the details today, but I outlined it in my book and in a number of other lectures, the history of black Muslim terror against white supremacy. I say terror because in the eyes of Christian Europe, the incarnation of evil was black Muslim males. And so I suspect myself that bin Laden was never to be the ultimate enemy of, or the ultimate face of enemy Islam. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has told us that ultimately their plan was to attack the nation, to saddle the nation of Islam with the charge of terrorism. Why am I introducing my topic in this way? Because there are those who have a vested interest in arresting the development of white supremacy's decline. They know something about Islam and black folks. And on the basis of know something that most of us in here probably don't know. They know what Stoddard knew regarding the relationship of Islam and black people. And since we are at Howard University in February, in Black History Month, I thought maybe I would share some of what I know them to know with us as a context of why I can't let this African origin of Islam thing go. Because by demonizing Islam in the black community, then the patient will reject the medicine. And the medicinal value of Islam, as taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, will not enter the system of the black community and have the healing effect. And so my black babies will come up in a community that I would rather shield them from. Now, this is Black History Month. And when discussing Islam, black folks, and Black History Month, who else could we think of? Who else do we think of than our great scholars? Dr. Chancellor Willams, Dr. Yosef bin Yachanan, and Dr. John Henry Clark. These are our academic intellectual giants. They are the icons of revolutionary scholarship. And they have made a significant contribution to this discussion of Islam and black folks. I will part company with them today. But please don't run and put out a YouTube video talking about Brother Wesley is disrespecting the great scholars. Brother Wesley is not disrespecting the scholars. See, scholars know that scholars check scholars.
Yes, sir.
That's how scholarship works. And it was, please, John Henry Clark, Dr. John Henry Clark, that said the student's obligation was to build upon the previous generation's work, to find what is missing, omitted, intentionally or not, neglected, and flat out incorrect, so we can make the necessary changes for the following generation. It is our obligation not to offer blind deference to our scholars. In Islam, it's called taqlid. The Muslim world wants us to offer taqlid, blind deference to the imams, want us to receive their scholarship and don't question it, wants us to receive their conclusions and don't question it. But we in the so-called Afrocentric community expect the same. We are expected to make blind deference to our great scholars. And if we challenge them, if we raise our hand and say, so-and-so was incorrect on this point, we are accused of disrespecting them. There is no disrespect, but there is no taqlid either. It is our obligation to take what our scholars of the past did, stand on their shoulders, and move forward. We do it respectfully, but we don't fear challenging our teachers. Please. Now, to speak about Islam and black folks during Black History Month,
Come on, man.
at Howard University, there is no better starting point than the great Dr. Chancellor Willams, who not only is an alumnus of Howard University, but retired here from Howard University, and is the author of probably the most iconic work in the Afrocentric circle, especially as it relates to Islam and black folk. Dr. Chancellor Willams' Destruction of Black Civilization has been called the Black Bible. And I don't take issue with that. But just like the other Bible, there are historical flaws. And the historical flaws of both Bibles, uncorrected, produce a flawed ideology, produce a flawed starting point in life. Dr. Chancellor Willams' Destruction of Black Civilization is iconic, and appropriately so. But all icons can be scrutinized, can be put under the microscope, and the flaws, the chipped paint, can be pointed out and corrected. I will, in the brief moments that I have since I am here at Howard University, in honor of my great predecessor, Dr. Chancellor Willams, I want to talk about the destruction of black civilization in the context of my claim of the African origin of Islam, please. See, because Dr. Chancellor Willams, the great Dr. Chancellor Willams, said Islam was a white man's religion. Dr. Chancellor Willams said Islam meant change into the white man's image. His ideas and value systems. What happened in converting the blacks to Islam was the supreme triumph of the white over the black. According to Dr. Chancellor Willams, Islam is the white man's religion, the white man's value system. And for blacks to convert to Islam means white supremacy has triumphed. Please. Now, this must be put in context. Brother Chancellor's position, his characterization of Islam as a white man's religion, is based on a particular ethnographic identification that's operative throughout this whole book. for Dr. Chancellor Willams, the Arabs themselves are a white people, the Semitic division of Caucasian. So because, according to Brother Chancellor, Arabs, therefore presumably Muslims, are a white people, a Semitic division of the white race, then Islam, the Islam of these white Arabs, can be none other than a white man's religion. Please. Now, this is in flat contradiction to what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said.
Come on.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that Islam was the religion of black humanity. That's what he said. He said Islam was the religion of black humanity. Well, is Islam a religion of black humanity? Or is Islam the white man's religion? Now, let's be clear. Those of us students of Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Yusuf bin Yaqub, Dr. Chancellor Willams, most of us have no problem critiquing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, putting what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said under the microscope of critical inquiry. Nor should you have a problem doing so. But let's be clear. As the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teaching can justly be submitted to scholarly scrutiny, Dr. Chancellor Willams, Dr. Yusuf bin Yaqub, and Dr. John Henry Clark, their teachings too can rightly be subjected to critical scrutiny. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said Islam was the religion of black humanity. Dr. Chancellor Willams said Islam was a white Arab religion. What do? Flip a coin? Do we get dogmatic and set trip? Say, my man is right. It is what it is. My man is right. It is what it is. Please. In my book, Black Arabia and the African Origin of Islam, I offer an answer to that question. But not a dogmatic answer. I don't do dogma. Be clear. I am a Muslim. I believe that the Honorable, Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the Messiah. I'm going to put my cards on the table.
Come on, do that.
I believe the Honorable, Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the Messiah. I believe he is alive.
Come on. Come
I
on.
believe the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is the Apostle of God. I believe that. But I'm not before you today in this capacity as a lecturer, as a public educator, as a Muslim believer. You can believe or disbelieve. That's not my concern right now. I approach my Islam the way I approach your religion, as an historian of religion. I won't be a dogmatist for any of it.
Come on.
As much as I love the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, I won't be a dogmatist for either. And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has given me, as he told me, he does not expect that of us. dogmatists. So we have to wrestle with these questions. We have to deal with them. We can't stick our head in the ground and think they will go away. So with my book, Black Arabia, I attempted to answer the question academically. Put the facts on the table. I have demonstrated, please. My book, Black Arabia, builds on the work of Dr. Yusuf bin Yaqub. In his book, The African Origin of the Major Western Religions. See, though he was a colleague of Dr. Chancellor Willams, it was Dr. Ben who first academically alerted us to the fact that Islam is an African religion. He notes that Islam's foundation is so intensely African in structure. He notes that Islam, with her God Allah, cannot escape its indigenous African origin. And he notes that Islam's Arabian Peninsula African origin. Now I cite Dr. Ben, so we are clear that what they call the Trinity of Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, and Dr. Williams, you think there's unanimity. There's agreement, there's ijma' or consensus among them about the relation of Islam and black folk. I know you think that because all three of them are marched out as stormtroopers against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his claim that Islam was a religion of black people. But that is a false consensus. The Honorable Dr. Ben first alerted us academically to the fact that Islam was an African religion. Please. In my book, I demonstrated this. I won't go into right now because there's another focus I want to get to. But in my book, I demonstrated that Arabia is the geological, ecological, climatological, and ethnological extension of Africa. In other words, Africa, or Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, is Northeast Africa. Right. All of the data indicates it. The geological data indicates it. The ecological data, the data from the flora and the fauna indicated. The climatological data indicated. And most importantly, the ethnological data indicates it. That is to say, the peoples of ancient Arabia are African peoples. The genetic evidence, the archaeological evidence puts the point beyond suspicion or question. Arabians are African peoples, and what they contributed to civilization, what ancient Arabians contributed to civilization, must be recognized and embraced as African contributions to civilization. I demonstrated that the early Arabians were Africans who migrated from the mainland of Africa during the early out-of-Africa dispersals, most recently 70,000 years ago. And I demonstrated that descendants of these African Arabians, or we will call Afrabians, Africans in Arabia, Afrabians were the first to call on Allah. Allah is not a slave god. Allah was not introduced to black people by some white Arabs. Allah was introduced to white Arabs by black people. Allah, the invocation of Allah, Ta'ala, Allah Most High, was documented among black people thousands of years before Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was ever born. I document it. I also document that Islam as an organized spiritual system of venerating Allah through the cultic rituals of the Kaaba is first documented among these Afro-Arabians before the birth of Prophet Muhammad, and was in some cases already called Islam. By that I mean this: there are those who would take issue with my claim of the African origin of Islam. Because their only familiarity with it is through YouTube. I have to say this. Y'all need to stop that. Stop debating YouTube videos. You know YouTube has a 10-minute limit. If you know that you just watched a YouTube video of me that's extracted from a 3-hour lecture, why would you attempt to debate my YouTube video, talk about what I didn't say? Why didn't I say this? How you know I didn't say it? See, that YouTube scholarship, that's the ghetto scholarship that I'm talking about. I don't backpedal from it. I don't apologize for it. That's that lazy scholarship. Some of my critics, those YouTube scholars, take issue on the assumption that I claim that because the worship of Allah is documented among black people before Prophet Muhammad, then that alone is the basis of my claim that Islam is African. And the argument is that, well, there were pre-Muhammad Christians who worshiped Allah. That doesn't make them Muslim. And that point is correct. But that was never a point that I advanced. That was never an argument that I advanced. Because I made it clear that not only the veneration of Allah, Ta'ala, God Most High, is found documented among black people, but the veneration of Allah through the cultic ritual system of the Kaaba predates Prophet Muhammad. Worshipping Allah through the signature of Islam today is not just the veneration of Allah, but it's venerating Allah through the cultic system of the Kaaba in Mecca, the ritual system. And I documented that that ritual system, that cultic veneration of Allah predated Prophet Muhammad and was first documented among these black descendants of those Arabians or Africans in Arabia. And in some cases, these black Arabians called it Islam before Prophet Muhammad. So I have documented. You want to argue with the book, not the YouTube video. Deconstruct the footnotes. I provide 900 footnotes. Now, in the academy, the standard is to use endnotes. So most books don't use footnotes, they use endnotes, and that's fine. But I use footnotes for a reason. See, some of us are new readers. We're lazy. We're not going to flip to the back to see if there's any documentation. And so because we won't flip to the back to see what documentation is there, we may assume there is no documentation. So I don't want you to journey through my book with that assumption. So I use the old school style with the footnotes so it knocks you in the head page after page. You have to deal with the documentation. You cannot like what it said, but deconstruct the argument. Deconstruct the documentation. Don't dispute my YouTube videos, please. Now, Brother Chancellor Willams, his fundamental error from my perspective in his assessment of Islam and black folk is a most unfortunate ethnographic assignment. In other words, Brother Chancellor's ethnography was wrong. He was a brilliant historian, a meticulous researcher, but he suffered from what so many of us suffer from in writing about Islam and black folks: the inability to engage Islam from the basis of its primary sources. the Arab tradition. And see, not being able to engage the history of Islam from the perspective of the primary sources created a blind spot for Brother Chancellor. The blind spot was his assumption that Arabs are white folk. And so when the Muslims invaded Egypt in 641, and then attempted to go into Nubia in 643 and then again in 651, he assumed that these were white Muslims aggressing black Christians. And so he saw that conflict as a race war. But in fact, as I demonstrated, the Muslims, now we'll discuss it later, those black Muslims those Arabs who invaded Egypt were black. But it was Chancellor Willams' blind spot was his ethnography. If there was a Muslim and there was Arab, they were white. He did not take due notice, and he did not have access to the data at the time he published the first edition in 1974 of this book. He did not have the data indicating that those Muslims who erupted out of Arabia were the black descendants of those original Afro-Arabians or Africans in Arabia. Brother Chancellor writes, blacks are in Arabia for precisely the same reasons blacks are in the United States, South America, and the Caribbean islands, through capture and enslavement. This is a clear indicator of his ethnographic blind spot, please. For Ranoko Rashidi says it better and more accurately. The Arabian Peninsula was, like much of Asia, first populated by black people. Some of the surviving black populations, known as the Bedouins, are major portions of the Mahra population, found still in the extremities of Arabia. Please. That's a Mahra Arab, please. No, Mahra Arab. Black Arabs today, descendants of those original blacks that populated the peninsula, operating off of the assumption that Arabia, the black folks are foreign to Arabia. And to the extent that black folks are there for the same reasons we are here in America, through capture and enslavement, highlights the blind spot, the ethnographic blind spot of our brother, which is why he could not concede that those Muslims who engaged black Christians in Egypt and Nubia could be anything other than white, please. But Bertrand Thomas, in his book The Arabs, tells us the original inhabitants of Arabia were not the familiar Arabs of our time, but a very much darker people. A proto-Negroid belt of mankind stretched across the ancient world from Africa to Malaya. This belt gave rise to the Hamitic peoples of Africa, to the Dravidian peoples of India, to an intermediate dark people inhabiting the Arabian Peninsula. In the course of time, two big migrations of fair-skinned peoples, white folk, came from the north to break through and transform the dark belt of man beyond India, and to drive a wedge between India and Africa. The more viral invaders overcame the dark-skinned peoples, absorbing most of them, driving others southwards. The cultural condition of the newcomers is unknown. It is unlikely that they were more than wild hordes of adventurous hunters. In other words, Bertrand Thomas documents that Arabia was part of, in ancient times, a black belt, a stretch of black mankind from India to Africa. And it was later a migration of white hordes who broke that black belt, who entered the peninsula around the 13th century BCE. And those whites lived among the black Arabians, learned the language of the black Arabians, began speaking, adapted some of the culture of the black Arabians. And Brother Chancellor mistook the, what they call Mustariba Arabs, the converted Arabs, the white invaders who converted to Arabism, with which he was most familiar with, and with which most of us are most familiar with, that white Arab. He mistook them to be the true Arab and was unaware of the fact that they had entered and settled among the black Arabians and learned how to be Arab from them. Please. Again, Dr. Willams says, for the Arabs themselves are a white people, the Semitic division of Caucasians. This statement is, in my opinion, a clear example of the danger of writing any history not able to engage the relevant primary source materials. For even if Brother Chancellor can't be faulted for not utilizing archaeological, ethnographic, genetic data that wasn't available at the time he wrote the book, there was sufficient data in the classical Arabic text that would have prevented this statement and that would have thrown a whole new light on the relationship of those Muslims who erupted out of Arabia and entered Africa. Please. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we are told he had a dream. And in his dream, Brother Askia, he sees black sheep and white sheep. And he says the white sheep far outnumbered the black sheep. The prophet tells Abu Bakr the meaning of his dream. He says those black sheep are the original Arabs called to Islam, his followers. He said those white sheep are the non-Arab foreigners who converted to Islam, largely the Persians and the Byzantines, who converted to Islam. The prophet tells Abu Bakr that the day is coming where the white sheep will so outnumber the black sheep that people will fail to take notice of the black sheep and fail to recall that the black sheep were ever there. In other words, non-Arab whites will convert to Islam in such great numbers that the world will assume they are the original Muslims. And those original black Arabs, those original black Muslims around him will be forgotten. So the white sheep, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, I put him up there because he is the face of Islam in the world today. And when we think of Muslims, we think of Muslims of the like of King Abdullah, a white Arab. But that's the white sheep. The black sheep, that black Arab, represented by this Mahra Arab, from southern Arabia. The world doesn't even take notice of him. The world is unaware of the fact that it was those like him who were initially around Prophet Muhammad. And those like the king entered Islam later, please. Ibn Manzur, see, if our brother, Dr. Chancellor Willams, would have availed himself to Ibn Manzur's Lisan al-Arab, the most authoritative Arabic lexicon, he would have known that the very term aswadul jilda, black-skinned, meant in Arabic pure Arab. Because Ibn Manzur tells us the pure Arab described their color as black and the color of the non-Arab as red. Purity of Arabness was denoted by blackness of skin. The blacker you were, the better claim you can make of having a noble genealogy, a pure Arab genealogy. Whiteness of skin denoted foreigners, please. So al-Mubarak, 9th century grammarian, Brother Dr. Chancellor Willams could have availed himself to Mubarak's observation that the Arabs used to take pride in their darkness and blackness, and they had a distaste for a light complexion. And they used to say that a light complexion was the complexion of the non-Arabs, in particular non-Arab slaves. Because prior to the 15th, 16th century, prior to the fall of the Ottoman Empire's extensions in parts of Europe, most Muslim slaves were white. I know you think blacks are the choice slave for Muslims. And some of our black history scholars have perpetuated that false belief. But the preference for black African slaves in the Muslim world was a relatively recent development. That earlier, the preferred slave was a white-skinned slave, such that white Arabs in Arabia at the time before Prophet Muhammad and after Prophet Muhammad, white Arabs were assumed to be slaves because whiteness of skin denoted foreignness, non-Arabness. Blackness of skin denoted purity of Arab genealogy. And so there was a distaste for white complexion among black Arabs. These black sheep that were the original servant around Prophet Muhammad, please. And if nothing else, the great Dr. Chancellor Willams surely could have availed himself to al-Jahiz, the glory of the blacks over the whites. For in there, al-Jahiz says explicitly that the Arabs pride themselves in their black color. See, the Muslims who erupted out of Arabia and took Islam from one end of the earth to the other, they were black Arabs. Arabism was denoted by blackness, jet blackness. And unfortunately, Brother Chancellor, not availing himself, not able to avail himself to the necessary primary source material, had this blind spot in his scholarship, this ethnographic blind spot that colored the work, that forced him to interpret history the history of Islam in Africa from a very skewed perspective. He viewed it from the perspective of Caucasians aggressing black folk, not from the perspective of one episode in a long history of black-on-black conflict. A history, by the way, that he was well aware of and documented in the destruction of black civilization. Black-on-black conflict. But due to his ethnographic blind spot, he could not see the encounter of Islam and Africa as another episode of black-on-black conflict. Please. Of those black Arabs, those pure black Arabs, the paramount black Arabian tribe was the Quraysh, the tribe of Prophet Muhammad. I cite for you a statement from Prophet Muhammad's first cousin, our father, Ibn al-Abbas, the son of Prophet Muhammad's uncle, al-Abbas, one of his 10 paternal uncles, al-Abbas. Our father, Ibn al-Abbas, said, he was a poet, and he said, I am the black-skinned one. My complexion is black. I am from the noble house of the Arabs. This is Prophet Muhammad's first cousin, articulating that his blackness of skin is the signature of him being from the noble house of the Arabs. Please. And I must point out, for those who want to argue that, or who have argued, that Allah is a slave god, this black Arab tribe, the Quraysh, dominant in Mecca prior to the rise of Prophet Muhammad's movement, were already known throughout Arabia as Ahlullah, the people of Allah. And they would go throughout the peninsula claiming, Nahnu Ahlullah. We are the people of Allah. We are the family, the house of Allah. These are black Arabs prior to Prophet Muhammad. Please. Now, quickly. The most important, in fact, all of the main actors in the drama, which was early Islam, from Prophet Muhammad's time forward, all of the main actors were black, tribal actors. Those who are familiar with Islamic history know that the two most important groups in that early story are the Muhajirun and the Ansar. That's to say, the immigrants, those who immigrated with Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina, and those who were in Medina and helped him, the Ansar. Both the immigrants and the helpers, the Muhajirun and the Ansar, were drawn from the black tribes of Arabia. The Muhajirun, the black Quraysh, and the Ansar, the Banu Hazraj and Banu Aus, two jet black tribes from Medina. So the two most important tribal groups, the two most important actors in early Islam were drawn from the black Arabians, those descendants of those original Arabians or Africans in Arabia. Please. But something happened, and this is the point. The face of Islam is not black anymore. The white sheep dominate as the prophet anticipated. The white sheep far outnumber the black sheep, such that the black sheep are not known to have ever existed. How did that process happen? Well, there was a number of factors. There was immigration, there was conversion of non-whites, regular conversion, natural conversion. And there was miscegenation of race mixing, but something more important happened to speed that whole process up. There was a revolution that occurred in the Muslim world, which changed not only the political dynasty of Islam, it changed the face of Islam, it changed the spirit of Islam. It's written as the Abbasid Revolution, but that's a misnomer. The Abbasids were a black family from the larger tribe of Quraysh. And even though this revolution and the dynasty that followed it is named after them, they weren't responsible for the revolution. The revolution came at the hands of whites, Persians, what we now call Iranians, in particular over in Khorasan. See, please, beloved, I must disabuse us. Iranians are not Semitic people, they're not Arabs. They are Muslim, but they're not Arabs. The Muslim world and the Arab world are not the same. Iranians are Muslims, but they're not Arabs. They're not Semitic at all. They are Indo-Aryan, and very proudly so. Their language, Parsi, is not a Semitic language, it's an Indo-European language. Why is that relevant? Well, the Persians historically have been very proud Indo-Aryans, boast of being the whitest of whites, the most hook-nosed of whites. That's their boast. They were also historically very disdainful of black. And the Persians were responsible for a glorious civilization, the Persian Empire, the Zoroastrian or Sasanian Empire based in Persia. And as I will touch on later, it is not here today. And the reason it is not here is because black Muslims destroyed it during those conquests, under the leadership of a powerful black Muslim, Sa'd ibn Waqqas, the uncle of Prophet Muhammad. Sa'd and his black Muslim troops took down the Sasanian Empire. And the Persians never got over that. To this day, Iranian nationalists who want to see a resurgence of Persian glory loathe Sa'd ibn Waqqas, the tall black uncle of Prophet Muhammad. They loathe him because they charge him with destroying the great Sasanian civilization. But when Khorasan, when Persia was brought into the Muslim Empire, not only did black Muslims destroy the Sasanian Empire, but the caliphs in Medina had the nerve to set up as a governor over in Persia and Khorasan, a jet black era that seems to have fueled the nationalist and racist anger of the Khorasans, of the Persians. And that eventuated in a clandestine plot, a conspiracy to overthrow the Black dynasty of Islam, the Umayyad dynasty of Islam. The first dynasty of Islam was a dynasty of black Arabs. But black Arabs that in many parts of the new empire was in control or were overlords in white areas. And nowhere was that more consequential than in Persia and Khorasan, because the Persians could tolerate that for so long. And so in 750, or by 750, a plot, a clandestine revolution was fomented. And ultimately, the Khorasanians, the Persians, converted to Islam and overthrew the Black Umayyad dynasty. And by doing so, again, Islam experienced not only a political shift, but an ethnographic shift, because now Persians dominate Islamic culture. And this had a very fundamental consequence. Under the Black Umayyads, blackness was glorified. Under the Abbasids, blackness was disdained. And so there is in Islamic literature, and some of you may know it because maybe you pulled it up on YouTube or on Google, some anti-black talk from Muslim literature. Maybe some of you posted it on my YouTube videos, thinking you debated me, saying, see, Islam is anti-black. See what this hadith says? See what this Muslim scholar says? Blacks are raising heads. That black man is the face of the devil. Yeah, that's in Muslim literature. There's a lot of anti-black sentiment in Muslim literature. The question is, when was it introduced? See, Islam has a 1400-year history. Islam post-Muhammad, which I'm distinguishing from Islam pre-Muhammad. So there's an Islam pre-Muhammad. But Islam post-Muhammad has a 1400-year history with many shifts, many developments. So if you want to prove a point, if you want to march a Muslim scholar out and quote him, well, who is that Muslim scholar?
Go ahead.
What time period is he from? What's his ethnic background? I don't say he's a Muslim. That don't mean he's an Arab. Islam went from, during the Umayyad period, pro-black to very anti-black. Now, if we're Muslims, we can judge this how you want to judge. I know Islam is a universal religion. I know Islam can help us transcend race. I know that. But that's a theological question. I'm speaking now as an historian. We can judge it how we please. We can say those black Umayyads were bad Muslims because they were pro-black. Do what you will with it. But it is the case that under the Umayyads, Islam was pro-black. Under the Abbasids, Islam became radically anti-black. And so the anti-black sentiments that exist in the Muslim literature was introduced after the Abbasid Revolution. The Persian sentiment because Islamic culture now became Persian culture. And so I use the term Islam was Aryanized. Let me show you an example, please. I'll show you a contrast. The first caliph of the Umayyad dynasty, the first dynasty of Islam, the Umayyads ruled from 661 till they were overthrown in 750. The first caliph of the Umayyads was Muawiyah. He began ruling in 661. Muawiyah saw what was coming. Muawiyah was a black Qurayshi Arab from Banu Umayyah. He was very black, he and his sons. And he didn't like white folks. Judge him how you will, he just didn't. And I suspect that this is why. Muawiyah seemed to have had a premonition of what was coming. Muawiyah said, I see that these white folks have become very numerous and are saying bad things about those who have passed. I can envision a daring enterprise from them against the authority of the Arabs. I am thinking of killing half of them and leaving half of them to set up markets and build roads. The first caliph, Black Muawiyah, the first caliph of the Umayyad dynasty, says these whites, he thinks, are plotting. He envisioned a plot on the part of the whites in his kingdom against the authority of the black Arabs. He sensed it then, around 680. And that's exactly what transpired by 750. The whites in the kingdom plotted. The plot started in Kufa, in Iraq, but was exported into Persia and Khorasan. And exactly as Muawiyah envisioned, it took place. Now, Muawiyah said he thought that maybe he would enslave the white folks to cut off the conspiracy that he envisioned. Again, judge it how you will. This is history. Judge him as a bad Muslim because he thought of enslaving white folks to keep them from overthrowing the government. Judge him as you will. But get this point. At this point, at this time, Islam, the face of Islam is black under the Umayyads. And not at all friendly or enamored with whiteness, please. Now this is an Abbasid period statement. Ibn Rumi, not the mystic Ibn Rumi. Ibn Rumi, the poet who died in the 9th century. He writes poetry. And he wrote a particular poem condemning the Abbasids, the Abbasid Caliph in particular. And this is the 9th century. The Abbasid Revolution occurred, so-called Abbasid Revolution occurred in 750. So the sea change has occurred now. Ibn Rumi chastises the Abbasid Caliph. He says, you insulted them. The Abbasid Caliph was abusive to according to Ibn Rumi, and the family was abusive to the family of Prophet Muhammad, the Shareef, the Hashemite. The Abbasid Caliph was abusive to them, and Ibn Rumi chastises the Abbasid Caliph. Says, you insult them, the family of the Prophet Muhammad, because of their blackness, while there are still pure-blooded, black-skinned Arabs. However, you are blue. Let's be clear. J.A. Rogers made a fundamental error in his book, Sex and Race. He found a description of Prophet Muhammad being described as blue in Arabic and assumed that meant he was blue-black. No. Blue in Arabic, like red in Arabic, meant white skin. Green in Arabic meant black skin. So he says, however, you are blue. The Abbasid Caliphate is now white skin by Ibn al-Rumi's time. He says, the Romans have embellished your faces with their color. The Abbasid caliphs, who were black initially, took all of these white concubines. And so the caliphate was whitened over time due to miscegenation, due to all of these white concubines. And Ibn al-Rumi condemns the Abbasids because now they are white-skinned, and they condemn, they abuse the family, the black family, we are told, of Prophet Muhammad because of their blackness. So we went from Muawiyah, the initial caliph of the Black Umayyad dynasty, this black caliph who didn't like white folks because he was suspicious of their plotting against the black Arabs. And we have traveled now to the post-Abbasid period, where the caliph face is now white and can abuse the family of Muhammad because they were black. That's the distance that was traveled. This is the Aryanization of Islam, and it still occurs today. Please. An example of the Aryanization of Islam today. And I'm going to close on this. One of Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, key companions was Ali ibn Abi Talib. His cousin, the son of one of his jet black uncles, Abu Talib, Ali would marry one of Muhammad's daughters, Fatima, and thus produce for Muhammad grandchildren. Ali would also be the fourth caliph, the fourth of the so-called rightly guided caliphs. And it is Ali who is the leading figure of Shiism. From the Shiite perspective, Ali was the only legitimate caliph because of Ali's familial or blood relation to the Prophet. So the Sunni Shiite divide is over Ali. Well, what do we know about Ali? As-Suyuti, the paragon scholar of the 14th century, tells us in his history of the caliphs, Ali was husky, bald, pot-bellied, large-bearded, and jet black. Shadid al-Ud, jet black. Abu Ja'far Muhammad, Ali's son, tells us about his father, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He was a black-skinned man with big, heavy eyes, pot-bellied, bald, and kind of short. A black-skinned man. And now Jahiz tells us those of Abu Talib's family. Abu Talib is Ali's father. Those of Abu Talib's family are the most noble of men, are more or less black. All of the descriptions of Ali ibn Abi Talib was that he was a jet black skinned man. And the description, he is the progenitor of the line of the Shiite Imams. The early descriptions of the Imams, his descendants, all have them as being black. Please. But if you go to Iran today, you will see photos of Ali and the imams throughout Iran. Iran is a Shiite nation. And this is the picture of Ali ibn Abi Talib that you will encounter in Iran today. This is the Aryanization of Islam. So, was Islam an African religion? It was. If we assume that the Muslim world, as we encounter it today, as we experience it today, is that Muslim world that rose up in Arabia in the 7th century, and we fall victim to their propaganda. It was those who had hate for the black ruling dynasty of Islam, overthrew it and changed the whole color, tenor, and spirit of Islam. So when you write about Islam, make sure you correct all blind spots. Brother Chancellor judged when he read the Western texts about Islam. He assumed that the Muslim world that he saw was a Muslim world alive on the pages that he read. But it was not. Those Muslims who went into into Egypt, and tried to go into Nubia with those black sheep. And yes, that period is one more episode in our history of black on black conflict, when Ethiopia, a century before, went into Arabia. Black Christian Ethiopians went into Arabia a century before and conquered Saba and tried to go up to Mecca. That was black on black aggression. When Kemet went into Nubia, when Nubia went into Kemet, that was black on black aggression. See, that's in our history. We can evaluate it how we please, but you know, like I know, we evaluate black on black aggression differently than we evaluate white on black aggression. See, you can call me nigga, but don't let your white friend call me nigga. That's what we say. That's not me. That's what we say. That's what we think. No, that black on black thing has different value than that white on white thing. And so if Brother Chancellor wasn't a victim to that ethnographic blind spot, then I suggest he could have better evaluated the encounter between the Muslims and the Nubians and Christians, and thus better evaluated the history of Islam and its relationship to African peoples. With that, I'm going to close and open up to question and answers. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, sir.
Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Wa alaikum salam.
In one of the hadiths, there is a description, and I think you have brought it up before, that when the prophet is described as having armpits as white as white.
Yes, sir.
And understanding in that context what they meant as white being purity and not so much as color. Can you elaborate on that?
Right now, well, yes, I will elaborate on the hadith. The hadith of which you speak, and there are many, that describe Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as white. That particular hadith has particular language, describes Muhammad as white man. Also, hadith describe Prophet Muhammad as being of a dark brown complexion, asma. Are these contradictions? Well, not from the perspective of the classical Arabic text. I'm not going to speak of the truth or falsity of either one of those right now. I'm only going to address the hadith literature. Do with it, whatever we're going to do with it. Accept it, reject it. But understand it in its context versus our context. In Arabic, classical Arabic, abyad, the word abyad, white, does not speak to chromaticity, skin color. It speaks to luminosity. It's a glow. White means brilliant, luminous. Has a secondary meaning of possessing a pure essence. You want to say white-skinned in classical Arabic, you say ahmar, red. Red meant white-skinned. Thus, in Muawiyah's statement about those white folks, he used hum, the plural ahmar. He literally said those reds. So you want to say white-skinned in classical Arabic, you say ahmar, red. You want to say black, you want to say white-skinned, you also say asra, blue. Red and blue denoted white-skinned. You want to say black-skinned in classical Arabic. You say aswad, black, or you say ahdar, green. So black and green and dark brown denoted black complexion. Red and blue denoted white skin. Abyad, white, did not denote chromaticity. And so the Ibn Manzoor, for example, said that abyad meant a black skin with a glow. So the early descriptions of Muhammad as abyad, white man, which is what that particular hadith says, describes Muhammad as having a glow about him and having a pure essence. Now, when in the same hadith collection, when the discussion turns to his look, he's described as ahmar, dark brown, or asma, dark brown. He had a dark brown complexion, yet he was a white man. Abyad, meaning he was a man of dark brown complexion, but he was a white man in that he had a glow and a pure essence. Now, that's the hadith literature. I want to be really clear. That's the meaning of the hadith literature. Now, what we do with it, we do it. Is it true? Is it not true? Well, that's another subject for another time. I won't entertain that right now. But that's the proper context to understand that hadith. Now, in later hadiths, with the Aaronization set in, Muhammad is no longer described simply as abyad. He's described as ahmar, as red. Such that in the 9th century, the hadith can say he is, in the 8th century, the hadith can say he's dark brown. And poets can write to the caliph, chastising the caliph for his mistreatment of Muhammad's black family. But by the 14th century, a scholar, Qadi Iyad, can write an important book on Prophet Muhammad Ashif, in which he says anyone who says Muhammad is black must be killed. Now, again, do with all of this whatever we're going to do with them. Accept, reject. But what we should not do, what we must not do, is read classical Arabic literature from a 21st century Western English context. White in English in America means one thing. White in Arabic in Baghdad in the 9th, 10th, 11th century meant something totally different. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Representative NYSA here, Howard, I just want to thank you again for coming out down.
Thank you.
And this weather, and thank you all. I'm currently reading Black Arabian book. I love it. I've yet to complete it, so you may have answered my question in the book. But I just want to point out, Brother Johnny Beatty said that one of the dominating attitudes in this early period was the assumption that African beliefs, cultural characteristics, and eating foods were all borrowed from the outside world. All kinds of theories and explanations were put forward on how the different religious traits had reached African societies from the Middle East or Europe. It is true that Africa has always had contact with the outside world, but religious and cultural influence from this contact cannot have possibly flowed only one way. There was always a give and take process. In your book, Black Arabia, you discuss some of the linguistic connections between, in particular, ancient Egypt, the Nile Valley civilizations, and early Islam in Arabia or Afro-Arabia, as you term it. How important is it, do you think, that we, in undertaking the study of African history, understand that give-take process that John Beatty talked about, especially with regards to language?
Very, very good question. It is, from my perspective, essential that we de-romanticize our study of Africa. It is, from my perspective, essential that we as Muslims de-romanticize our study of Islam. One aspect of the romantic approach to Africa is the belief that Africa was always this hermetically sealed community. That Africa exported influence, but never itself imported influence. That everything that developed on the continent is completely indigenous, and more, everything that developed everywhere else did so from Africa. Neither one of those are true. It is the case that Africa, Kemet, and when I say Africa, most of those, there's a sense in which you can say Africa and be accurate. But most of the romanticists don't talk about Africa. It's not Afrocentric, it's Chemocentric. The Kemet is the center of everything that developed in the ancient world. The Kemet was a hermetically sealed society that only exported influence and never imported influence. That is a romantic myth that disserves our quest for historical validation because it makes us easy targets for refutation. The genetic archaeological evidence clearly demonstrate the error of that presumption. So it's necessary to nuance the discussion, and most truth is nuance. Most truth isn't black and white like that. And so, Brother James, I think you hit on it. It is critical that we assess this stuff non-romantically. That includes Islam. The Muslim world tends to be very romantic, equally so, assuming that developed Islam that the Islam that they have in Arabia, in Mecca, or in Cairo, or in Tehran, that Islam is the Islam that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came with. And it developed this 1400 years throughout history, not impacted by the journey, not influenced by anything or anybody. And that is absolutely not the case. Islamic orthodoxy, be it Sunni orthodoxy or Shiite orthodoxy, is the result of Muhammad's message traveling through time and space and being impacted by time and space and the people encountered through time and space. The Islam of today, Islamic orthodoxy, was not what Prophet Muhammad received. This Islam was influenced by history, positively or mainly negatively from my perspective. So it is necessary that we be non-romantic in our assessment of all history, be it African or otherwise, and to recognize that most historical developments take place within the context of shared history rather than within a hermetically sealed context. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you so much. Ironically, my husband and I were just having a conversation about you coming, and one of the things that we talked about was what your thoughts would be on Chancellor Willams' book. And sure enough, that ends up being
Those are my thoughts on Chancellor Willams. I love
the very
Chancellor
thing
Willams' book.
that you came from. I sincerely appreciate the historical validation that you have presented here today. Also, I wanted to ask about the context, the historical context of Bilal.
Yes, ma'am.
In this time frame. On the one hand, he definitely is proof that Islam existed prior to Prophet Muhammad. On the other hand, I wanted to know what the historical context was in terms of him being black and being a slave at this time.
Very, very good question. Bilal was an Ethiopian, enslaved in Arabia during the Jahili period, the pre-Islamic period. There were Persians enslaved in Arabia. There were Romans enslaved in Arabia. And all slaves in Arabia were looked down upon. The Arabs were, especially Jahili Arabs, the Arabs of the pre-Muhammad period, the so-called period of ignorance, were very proud and very arrogant. And all slave communities were ill-treated by the Jahili Arabs. And insults derived from their slave status, which is why in early Islam you want to insult a person, you call them red. Well, that signified not just the complexion, but the slave status. Because slave status was the primary insult. Bilal being a slave, he was the source of great persecution. Now, he's called, one of the insults is son of a black woman. And that's taken to mean the Arabs were anti-black. No, the Arabs were black, but they were anti-slave. And most slaves in Jahili society, most black slaves, were children either recently captured or they inherited their slave status from their mother. Most African slaves were female concubines. That remained the case in Islamic history too. Most of the African slaves that were taken Unlike in the West, where the preferred slave was that mandingo male that can build civilization. In the Arab world, pre and post Muhammad, the preferred African slave was the woman for purposes of concubine. So the signature of slave status was you're the son, you inherited your slave status from your mother. So when Bilal and others were insulted by being called son of an Ethiopian woman, what they're saying is, you the son of a slave. That was the greatest stigma. It wasn't blackness. Blackness wasn't the stigma because these were black Arabs who uttered these insults, son of a black woman. It was slave status that was the insult. Now, something else that complicates the whole factor because Bilal's story is important and it was colored. Another development. In the post-Abbasid period, most of our literature, the overwhelming majority of our literature, hails from the Abbasid period, after the revolution. And it's all colored by that fact, that it was produced in the Abbasid milieu. The paradigm shift had already occurred. And what you find is Abbasid scholars purporting to write history, actually rewriting history, importing into earlier texts sentiments that did not exist at the time but reflect their own time and space. A perfect example is Arabic poetry. Arabic poetry, you know, scholars talk a lot about so-called pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. The Arabs were a very poetic people. Poetry had profound religious value in pre-Muhammad Arabia. But the poetry, as we have it, all hails from the Abbasid period, but it's supposed to reflect the poetry of pre-Muhammad time. And in this poetry, as Bernard Lewis documented, you have sentiments that on all other accounts, anti-black sentiments, that on all other accounts did not exist in Arabia at that time, but reflect the cultural milieu of the Abbasids, who are recording this stuff. So they import the racial sentiment. They retroject the racial sentiment of Abbasid times into the earlier period. So the insult, son of an Ethiopian woman, is now no longer a diss against slave status. It's now a racial slur, irrespective of the fact that it's a black person who uttered it. Now, in the spirit of full disclosure, there is another complicating factor. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us about, before Sheikh Anta Diop did, he taught us about the two divisions of the black family, two ethnographic divisions. He said that originally black folks were what ethnologists and anthropologists today call of the elongated type. The black folk with the thin features, silky hair, and the other type was he called tribe of Shabazz, which anthropologists call the broad type. Broad nose, broad lip, kinky head. There's two divisions of the black, so-called two divisions of the black race. Sheikh Anta Diop, an African origin of civilization, myth or reality, he talks about the same. Now, those of us who are students of history, students of African history, are painfully aware of the fact that there was a conflict, there was antagonism between the two, such that in ancient Kemet, the early dynasties had a festival slaughter of the Anu, the broad-featured dynastic, so-called dynastic race from Tassedi or Nubia, when they conquered the elongated type, the indigenous population of Kemet, the so-called Barbarians or Anu, they were, all of the remains indicate they were predominantly of the elongated type. And that, so the pre-dynastic race of Kemet was of the elongated type, primarily. The dynastic, but black. The dynastic race was of the broad type, hailing from Tassedi, we are to believe now. The dynastic people celebrated a festival called the Slaughter of the Anu. Recapitulating the slaughter of the black indigents, the elongated type, the pre-dynastic Egyptians. They celebrated their slaughter yearly in Kemet. So there was, for lack of a better word, there was a historical beef. Now, the Honorable Wesley Muhammad gives us some context to understand that historical beef. But I am inclined to believe that part of the apparent animosity that may be read into that insult, son of an Ethiopian woman, from these black, jet black Arabs who were of the elongated type. There's a possibility that that conflict informed it. However, I won't go too far with that. And the reason we can't go too far with that is because it was those black Arabs, their behavior in Egypt, in Nubia, contrary to the popular myth. Those black Arabs did not destroy the Coptic church. They took the churches from the white Chaldeans and gave it to the black Copts. There was harmony between the black Arab Muslims and the black Christians in Egypt and Nubia for 600 years, with the exception, the brief exception, of when Abdullah ibn Sa'd, the governor of Egypt, angry with the fact that Nubia, in 643, angry with the fact that Nubians were raiding the southern border of now Muslim Egypt, and ended up trying to invade Nubia and lost badly. Muslims lost to the Nubians badly. The black Arabs lost to the black Nubians badly in 643 and then again in 651. And from that point on, everybody got the message. And the Bot agreement doesn't counter this at all. Harmonious relations existed between the black Arabs and the black Nubians. Now, in Egypt, Islam was Aryanized. In particular, by the 9th century, most of the rulers in Egypt were Turkish, white Turks. And that fundamentally changed the dynamic between Muslim Egypt and Christian Nubia. So I say that to say that even though that historical conflict may play a role in that insult, I wouldn't go too far with that, because the relationship between the black Muslims and the Copts in Egypt and the Nubians, with minimal exception, indicate that that may not have been an issue at all. Yes, sir. Wa alaikum salam.
First, I want to say, Dr. Wesley Muhammad, I really appreciate your deliverance to us. So,
Thank you.
Tight package. You know, you were stating, and I really appreciate when you talked about Chancellor Willams, the book that you had there.
The destruction of black civilization.
The first, the destruction. But we want to go to that being the first edition.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I just want to say that since some of us may have been there as young students, in Chicago. And I just want to say that I was also blessed to be a teacher in Muhammad University of Islam number 51 when I was 20. But the beautiful thing about it is that that particular book, dedications are very important. We say what historians know, that we check each other. And the dedication of that particular book, which came out in 1974, late into 75, from the Third World Press, it was dedicated to the youth of the 60s. Now the 1971 book, who was it dedicated to? From Decrease Iowa. Context. It was dedicated to the inimitable, the profound Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson and to Dr. Leo Hansberry. So the context is that if you're reading the destruction of black civilization after 1973 into 74, you would be reading it dedicated to the youth of the 60s. And the youth of the 60s have no basis of contextual foundation unless we are taught properly. But if you read it in terms of the dedication to Dr. Leo Hansberry, who most people know of, who was very much here, and his context of the various dynasties and things like that, and Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And so that was the one thing that I had just wanted to point out. It was the first edition.
Yes, sir.
But it was the first edition of the
Press. Yes, sir.
I'm not correcting you.
Yes, sir. That's a correct context. Thank you.
Okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because one person in here may think that it was the only person.
Yes, sir.
And that's our responsibility.
It is. Thank you.
The other thing that I had wanted to share when because it's very important that the scholarship, as you expressed, we can have our faith and we can have our belief, but we ought to be able to stand firm on the documentation.
Yes, sir.
There was one British historian that said, Paul Johnson, he said, ideas should not take precedent over people.
Yes, sir.
They should inspire us, they should guide you, and they should encourage you. I brought this with me. It just happened to be green. Could you share with us, in terms of the masjids and the salas and the whatever you want to call it, how was nature utilized as an example of subhanahu wa ta'ala long before buildings and edifices were built? You give glory only to subhanahu wa ta'ala.
When you say how was nature utilized, can you give me some context in order to understand your question?
Well, because of using something that we know, the earth is Allah.
Yes, sir.
And the fullness thereof.
Yes, sir.
And they
Yes,
that
sir.
dwell therein.
Yes, sir.
And so that's the portion. That's the context, meaning our very body
Yes, sir.
comes about the earth,
Yes, sir.
as we were talking.
Yes, sir. You don't, answering generally, you don't find, not only in Muslim history, but in African history for the most part, what we find characteristic of the West is war with nature. This competition with nature. And, the harmony with nature is very African. Now, I am not a student of Islamic ecological history. But I know the Islamic refusal to depict usually not only humanity, but the animal kingdom on one level, it can be taken as a prohibition against imagery resulting from the iconoclastic dispute of the Byzantines. But it also could be interpreted as seen in the context of the respect for nature, or signaling, at least signaling a particular perspective regarding nature, such that nature is not depicted. And so characteristic Islamic art uses geometric designs. You don't find, in most cases, depiction of the flora or fauna. And so, again, that can be interpreted as signaling a particular perspective regarding nature. Other than that, again, I'm not a historian of Islamic ecological history. If there is more that you can offer on that, in that regard, beloved, I invite it, please.
Brother Duno will do that at another time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I solemnly.
Wa alaikum salam.
Dr. Wesley, could you
Yes,
share
sir.
with us how the separation of Arabia from Africa, I was looking in your book and in one of your presentations, you were showing the migration of the Ethiopians and how the length of the river or the ocean was separated.
Yes, sir. Ali Mazrudi talks about the tyranny of the Red Sea. The Red Sea is a tyrant because it forces most of us to assume it is the dividing line between Africa and Asia. That Africa ends west of the Red Sea, on the western shore of the Red Sea. And Asia begins on the eastern shore of the Red Sea. But the Red Sea is a relatively recent geomorphic development. The Arabian plate and the African shield separated about 5 million years ago, which is relatively recent in geological history. And in spite of the Red Sea, the climatologists indicate that Arabia has the climate of the Eastern Sahara. The fauna and floral evidence indicates that the animals and the plants are not of the Asian species. They're all of East African species. So the Red Sea should not be seen as the line of demarcation between Africa and Asia. That more likely the Persian Gulf on the eastern side of the Arabian Peninsula is a more accurate line of demarcation between Africa and Asia, because Arabia is actually northeast Africa in spite of the Red Sea. The Red Sea should be seen as a sea in the land of Africa. And instead of doing what we do, falling victim to the tyranny of the Red Sea and assuming that Africa stops there, and once you cross the Red Sea, you're in Asia, or you're out of Africa. That is not the case culturally, that's not the case ethnographically, and this is what's important. See, the folk on the other side of the Red Sea are Africans. They're African folk. In fact, the DNA evidence indicates that Arabia was the first home out of mainland Africa that those original out of Africa migrants settled in. Genetic evidence says every human being on the planet today, Y chromosome, this is Y chromosome evidence versus the DNA, the mitochondrial DNA evidence. The Y chromosome evidence indicates that every living human being traces its paternity to a group of about 200 or so Africans who migrated out of Africa around 70,000 years ago and went first to Arabia. And in Arabia developed for about 5,000 years and then spread out in the world. Now, let's be clear with what's not being said. That evidence doesn't suggest that humanity is 70,000 years ago. There were folks before that small group, but that small group survived such that they can populate, that we are genetically, at least paternally, our paternal genetics is said to trace back to this particular group. And what's important is that Arabia is understood to be where they first settled before migrating to the rest of the world. So Arabia, or Afrabia, was Africa's doorway to the world. It was the first home away from home, if you will. But Arabia is Northeast Africa. And the Red Sea should no longer confuse us regarding the relationship of Arabia and Arabian peoples to Africa. And again, the main point is that what Arabians contributed to the onward march of civilization must be recognized as African contributions to the onward march of civilization. And that includes Islam. So when I say Islam is an African religion, it's because those Africans in Arabia originated. Yes, sir.
Quickly.
Yes, sir.
In your dissertation, and you touched on it in your book, but I cite your dissertation first because it's where I first encountered it. You said you effectively deconstructed the traditional accounts of Prophet Muhammad receiving revelation from an angel named Jibril in a cave. And in your book, you referenced the Hanifs, and one of these Hanifs who introduced Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to the monotheistic system of Islam. Now, my question isn't how do you prove that, because that's documented. I mean, I'm quite sure that anyone that wants to access that, they can read it. But my question is the uproar for most Muslims and the uproar for most people when they read these things. I think that the problem is that people feel that because of the human accounts, the human encounters, it secularizes Islam and deflates the divine aspect of it. Why do you feel that people find it hard to accept human-to-human contact as far as revelation is concerned, rather than, the quote-unquote, for lack of a better term, spooky accounts that, are more popular?
The inability to recognize human-to-human context as transmissions of revelation derived from a fundamental misunderstanding of who God is. So if you know God is a man, then a man giving something to a man, you have no problem understanding it as revelation. God is a man. And what the brother is referencing, prior to Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, encounter with Jibril, the documents indicate that he first encountered Islam from what they call a Hanif, Zayd ibn Anta, from the Black Quraysh era. And he encountered Zayd on Mount Hira. We are told that Prophet Muhammad and his adopted son, Zayd ibn Haritha, who, regarding him, Dr. John Henry Clark is wrong. The great Dr. John Henry Clark describes Zayd ibn Haritha, the adopted son of Prophet Muhammad as an Ethiopian because he was black. He was black, he wasn't an Ethiopian. He was a black Arab from the Banu Kal. He was Prophet Muhammad's adopted son, whom according to according to Aisha, Muhammad early identified as his successor. But Zayd died in battle. We are told that Muhammad and Zayd ibn Thabit keep the Zayd separate. The Zayd ibn Amr, Zayd ibn Amr and Zayd ibn al-Haritha. Zayd ibn al-Haritha is his adopted son. We are told that Prophet Muhammad and Zayd were in the cave in Mecca, Mount Hira. And they were about to partake of some meat that Muhammad had sacrificed to the idol Al-Uzza. Because despite the current Muslim world's claim that of Islam, that Prophet Muhammad never sinned, the Prophet Muhammad never had a history of idolatry, well, the Quran does not support that. And nor does the early documents support that. They make it clear that Prophet Muhammad was a partaker in the foods of the idols, in particular Al-Uzza. And on this particular occasion, he and Zayd, his adopted son, Zayd ibn al-Haritha, they had some meat they were about to partake in. And along comes Zayd ibn Amr, who was a monotheist in Arabia before Muhammad and had suffered from the Quraysh in much the same way Muhammad would later. He condemned the Quraysh for their idolatry and their paganism. He affirmed that he will worship only one Lord, Allah Ta'ala. This is Zayd ibn Amr, when Muhammad was still eating meat sacrificed to Al-Uzza. That's no disrespect to the prophet because, see, the Quran doesn't call us to assume that his chosen ones never had a history of doing wrong. Right. That's not Islam.
Right.
God's power is shown in taking mud and making gold.
Right.
With his prophets, his apostles as well. So we are told that while Muhammad and Zayd, his adopted son, were about to partake of this meat, Zayd ibn Amr walks up. And Muhammad offers the Hanif, Zayd ibn Amr, some of his meat. And Zayd ibn Amr asks him, well, was that meat sacrificed to the idols? Muhammad said, yeah. And Zayd ibn Amr refuses and admonishes Muhammad, we are told. We are told that Muhammad went to the Kaaba with Zayd and declared that from that point on, he will not partake of the meats of the idols, and he will stay away from the idols. So, and the interesting thing, Zayd, according to Zayd ibn Amr, the monotheist, according to his poetry, described his monotheism as Islam. So, I just wanted to give some context. And again, now that doesn't, see, only those who lack an understanding of God assume that means that takes the origin of Islam out of a divine context. Because it was a man who made no pretensions to divinity, who can be said to have introduced Islam or admonished Muhammad Islamically, that means Islam has no divine origin. Now, I also don't make the claim, to be clear, I don't make the claim that Prophet Muhammad did not receive revelation from Gabriel. But Gabriel was a man too. So Gabriel is a part of the history of Muhammad's prophecy. what the documents indicate is there was a pre-Jabril period. And it's that pre-Jabril period that I think, not only as a historian, but as a Muslim, that is important. Not only because, or at least of which because Zayd was from that paramount black Quraysh tribe. And you have to remember, the Honorable Wesley Muhammad said, Master Farad Muhammad's father, that jet black man, was a Qurayshi.
That's right.
And his jet blackness is consistent with the jet blackness of the Quraysh in Muhammad's time. Zayd ibn Thabit. I'm sorry. Zayd ibn, I keep saying. Zayd ibn Thabit was black too. Zayd ibn Thabit is the one who, the secretary of Prophet Muhammad, who compiled the initial Quranic codex. And we have the Quran that we use today, Uthman's recension. It goes back to, said to go back to the Caliph Uthman, and which first compiled by Muhammad's secretary, Zayd ibn Thabit, who was from the Banu Mughira, who was an exceptionally black clan of the black Banu Quraysh. So the very Quran that the Islamic world uses testifies to those black sheep that are now forgotten. Yes, sir.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother, I mistakenly came into this room, but when I came in, I couldn't leave because I was listening to what you were saying. You touched upon so many points that I needed to ask questions on that I couldn't formulate one question to try to arrive at what I was trying to get to understand from you. Basically, you mentioned to me, I felt that there was a lot of things that you emphasized about being black. And as though Islam was either the center of being black or black was the center of Islam.
Right.
What I'm trying to ascertain here is that you touched upon a lot of salient points. I didn't hear anything mentioned about, you know, Abraham, where he was supposed to have come from, and the emphasis so much being placed on black. Because when you mention pre-Islamic times, we have to go all the way back to Adam. And Adam, all down through Abraham, through Moses, all taught the same in religion. Because it's in the Quran, for us to believe in all these prophets. The only difference with Rasulullah alayhi wa salam, he culminated all these prophets. And that's what's the job. And we can never say Allah is a man. Because Allah never said that of himself. He describes us in the Quran as insane. That's man. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has never described himself as a man. And if anyone tries to deduce that Allah is a man, they are inventing a lie against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the most salient points that I'm saying in essence is that I couldn't understand why you couldn't mention enough Quran, because the Quran is what, no matter what history says about who was Arab, who wasn't Arab, who was black, the Quran is the central point of Islam. And truth comes from, I don't care whether he's white, whether he's black, truth has no color, neither does love. And to make all this emphasis about the historical ingredients of the Abyssinians and the Persians and all, has nothing to do with Islam. Nothing at all. All we have is what Allah left us with until the end of time, or when he's going to fold up this creation he made, is the Quran. And for anyone to go in there to try to deduce what Allah described him in 99, himself in 99 names. Anything other than anybody, because one of the traps that the Christians fall into, they make men divine. They did that big mistake with Jesus, Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam. And they fall into the trap of diluting and polluting their religion. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Muhammad alayhi wa salam. Because these people were doing the very same thing that seems to be happening now. My question to you, brother, is that because I know, and I appreciate your talk, don't misunderstand me. I learned a lot here, but I'm saying in essence is this, I'm asking you, why didn't you go all the way back to Adam, through Abraham, because even the Jews are misguided Muslims.
Yes, sir.
They didn't take the word of Muhammad, and they chose to do what they wanted to do with Islam. And a lot of times, even they say a lot of the Jews were black. So I just wanted you to hit upon that, Aki, and for the point of saying that I have to say astaghfirullah when somebody calls Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala man.
Understand? Yes, sir.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, they said.
Thank you. What's your name?
My name is Tariq Abu Qasim. And one thing I should say, I started with Elijah Muhammad 50 years ago.
Yes, sir. Praise the Lord. Story. Thank you, brother.
Add on, God.
You raised so many very important points, and I thank you for doing so. I will attempt to answer as many of them as I can. Firstly, why didn't I go back to Adam? Why did I not emphasize the Quran? Well, beloved, I'm not here as an imam to live in the hood. I'm here as an historian. My presentation wasn't a theological sermon.
That's right.
I bear witness that had my intent been to preach Islam, to deliver a khutbah, I would have done exactly as you described. But I make no pretensions of being an imam. I make no pretensions of being here to convert anybody to anything. I'm here as an historian of religion. And I did say, brothers, believers before you went to, that, you know, theologically we can do with this what we will. But the history is the history. So my emphasis was on the historical record. I'm presenting history, not the full span of history. Certainly I could not hope to do so in the limited time that I have. But a particular episode in history, a particular duration of history, to make a particular point, beloved. And the point is, you know, I don't know if you were here when I quoted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But if I am to be charged with talking too much black talk in the context of Islam, then why did the Prophet himself mention his dream of the black sheep and the white sheep?
Yes, sir.
And he found it important enough to burden Abu Bakr with that dream and communicate to him that his initial followers, the initial Arabs, the initial Muslims, were black, and that white folks later entered the religion and defined its face. Now, my presentation was just a much more wordy expansion of what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself said. So I cite that and expound upon it as an historian. I have not offered my theological perspective on it because that's not what I'm here for. I have no problem doing so, but I want to be real clear that I'm presenting as an historian of religion. What's presented, we can all theologicify or theologicize it however we will. But I'm a historian, I presented history. Now on that note, you took offense to me saying Allah is a man. I understand that. That was a theological statement. But it's also a historical statement. granted, the Holy Quran doesn't explicitly say one way or the other. The Holy Quran itself does not explicitly say he is, does not explicitly say he isn't. But there's a reason, I imagine, we have Quran and Sunnah. And the early Sunnis were real clear that the Quran needs the Sunnah for clarification. Well, you can accept that or reject it. But I do know Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said God was a man.
Come on, black man.
Oh yeah, he did.
That's right.
And Sahih Bukhari, he described, that's Prophet Muhammad, not the messenger, Elijah Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, described his Lord as shocks.
As what?
Shocks.
What is that?
I'm going to tell you. Give me a moment. Allah willing. Well, I want to tell you, I would let Ibn Manzur tell us. In the most important Arabic lexicon, shocks is a person with a physical body. I would let Ibn al-Jawzi tell us what shocks is. Shocks is a body that consists of height and length. Prophet Muhammad said his Lord was a shocks, a man, a person with a body. So Prophet Muhammad is un-Islamic. So Prophet Muhammad, on what I take to be your reading of the Quran, beloved, violates the Quran. See, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his God was not the God of the current Muslim world.
Come on now.
Sunni or Shiite, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Or Sufi. See, Prophet Muhammad's God, peace be upon him, he had a body, a surah, a form. The Arabic surah.
Teach him, brother. Come on, brother.
He had a surah, a form. There was a human form. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, said Adam's form was created according to God's own form. Prophet Muhammad not only saw his form in a vision, he described it as a beautiful form, but he said he felt it. He said this man, God, this shocks, who had a beautiful form, in his vision, reached out and touched him, and the prophet said he felt the coolness of his fingertips in his breast. See, the God of Prophet Muhammad is not a spook. The God of Prophet Muhammad is a man. I understand if you don't want to use that terminology.
Go ahead.
But use the terminology that the classical Islamic tradition allows us to use. He's a shocks, a man with a body, with a form, surah, and it's a beautiful form. So if you have a God that doesn't have a beautiful form, that can't touch his prophet and his prophet feels his fingertips, you're not following Muhammad. You don't have Muhammad's God. And if Muhammad's God offends you, then I'm in good company. Yes, sir. Wa alaikum salam, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Wesley. This is so grateful that you will come here and spend this time, especially for our youth.
Thank you.
To bring your, the concept of Islam and basically the way the Elijah Muhammad brought his teaching to us.
Yes, sir.
Explaining God being a man. And even in the Holy Quran, we have where Allah says he uses the pronoun I.
Yes, sir.
That belongs to who?
Yes,
You
sir.
know, a pronoun takes the place of a noun. And a noun is a person, a place, or a thing. If Allah knows the language of the human being, if he knows the language, why would he use the language
Yes,
of
sir.
the human being?
Yes, sir.
The most important is for these young brothers here. I like the way that you showed them the war between the dialectical laws of opposites, where they take the great black men and put a white face on
Yes,
it.
sir.
And that's the same thing they did with the gods.
Yes, sir.
And when you go through the history, you'll see that God always appeared in the person of a black man.
Yes, sir.
All the way back to Atem.
Yes,
The
sir.
great God Atem was a black man.
Yes, sir.
The God Amun-Ra, who
Yes,
united
sir.
Afro Egypt.
Yes, sir.
Who, when you say your prayer, you have to give praise to that black man or your prayer
Yes,
don't
sir.
get answered. That's why you say Amen at the end of your prayer.
Yes, sir.
They need to know that.
Yes, sir.
You know what else would be worshiping a spook, and
Yes,
that's
sir.
why
A white spook.
Exactly. So, I just want to thank you on that point. And one other note I would like to ask you is, where we say that we believe that Allah appeared in the person of Master Prophet Muhammad. In the Muslim world, we're known as committing shirk. Can you expound on that a little bit about how Allah can come in the person of a man?
Yes, sir. Well, because, thank you, beloved. Wonderful points that you made. The whitening of the face of God. The whitening of the face of the prophets and companions was derivative. The primary crime was whitening the face of God himself. Now, let's be clear. That black face of God was destined to come white at a particular time.
That's right.
On a particular circumstance, or at least come looking white. Another subject for another time. But regarding point number 12, we believe Allah appeared in the person of Master Farah Muhammad. And the claim that this is shirk. Well, I mentioned the Aaronization of Islam. And I mentioned that revolution changed more than a political dynasty. It changed more than the face of Islam. It changed more than the spirit of Islam. It changed the theology of Islam. See, in black Umayyad Islam, God was a man. Proof of that is you go to Jerusalem today. Visit Haram al-Sharif. Go to the Dome of the Rock. And the tour guide will point out to you a footprint, a human footprint on the rock. And your tour guide will tell you that this footprint is Muhammad's. That when he ascended from Jerusalem to the seventh heavens, that he put his foot down and left that footprint. But if you go back to, let's go back to Umayyad Syria and ask the Umayyad Caliph, Abdul Malik, who erected the Dome of the Rock, why did you erect that dome over that rock? He would tell us something different, because he did tell us something different. He would tell us that, well, he's honoring that rock because that's where God lifted off when he ascended back to heaven after creating the world and spending 40 years in Jerusalem after creation. And then for various reasons, he withdrew himself and ascended back up to heaven. In his ascent, he put his human foot on the rock and lifted off. And that human footprint is a footprint of that very human yet divine God that the black Umayyads acknowledged. They even killed, they executed those who first attempted to introduce the non-Islamic God, the invisible, immaterial God, the spook God that Honorable Elijah Muhammad tells us about. See, we can trace the history of these ideas. It was Jad ibn Dur, a Persian, because Zoroastrianism, the religion of Persia, Sasanian Persia, with its dualism, this cosmic dualism that pitted black against white in an eternal struggle. A theological point that influenced the Persians' racial view. So they saw their whiteness in the context of the whiteness struggling with eternal blackness. And they saw the blackness of the Umayyads in the context of that evil blackness that their cosmic whiteness eternally struggled against. But they also had a particular view of God by that time. It's a very spooky view of God. And they introduced it, them and the Byzantines, the Christians from the Byzantine Empire. They introduced the spook god into Islam. And the first one, history tells us, the first one who tried to make the case for the mystery god, Jad ibn Durham, he was executed by the caliph for attacking the anthropomorphic god of Islam at the time. Executed. So, yeah, you know, that Islam of those black sheep that the world not forgot about, never knew existed. Not only did the black sheep disappear, but the God of the black sheep has disappeared. You know, that man God. And the God of prophet, you understand this? We like to quote, Muslims like to quote the prophet's statement that 3 generations after him will no longer be of him. But we quote it without understanding the full implications of that. The 3 generations of which the prophet spoke are the generations of the companions, the Sahaba. Yes. The Sahaba's first generation, his companions. The second generation, companions of the Tabi'at, the successors, Tabi'in. And the third generation, the generation of the successors of the successors, the Tabi'at, Tabi'in. These 3 generations take us through the Umayyad period. It stops there. And where the 3 generations that are likened unto Muhammad stop, the Abbasid period begins. So the revelation, the generations that Muhammad takes credit for, that he embraces, are the generations spanning the Black Umayyad dynasty that had that God that can leave his human footprint in a rock. And the generations that he disowns is that generation during which the spook god became dominant and the face became white. So, yeah, I believe that the God of Prophet Muhammad and the God of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, they're not different gods. But the God of Prophet Muhammad and the God of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it's not the God of the Muslim world today. The Muslim world has been Aryanized spiritually, ethnically, and theologically. It was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I'll close this question on this note, it's the Honorable Elijah Muhammad who called us back to Islam of Prophet Muhammad. Peace be upon him. His Islam is true Islam. His Islam is the Islam of Prophet Muhammad with deeper wisdom. Prophet Muhammad didn't have it all. But Honorable Elijah Muhammad said he spoke of the old Islam and the new Islam, but he said the new Islam will be different from the old Islam, and that some of the practices of the old Islam won't be required in the new Islam. But the belief is the same. Prophet Muhammad knew who God is. He didn't have the full knowledge of God. But he didn't have a spook God.
That's right. Come on. That's right.
2 more questions. I hope I answered your question, beloved. I go off on tantrums. Yes, ma'am. 2 more. Yours and one other. Yes, ma'am.
afternoon. My name is Anta from Survey. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
In the broad general sense, we are all the children of Abraham, right?
Yes.
All right. So we're living at a time when we're facing different types of unfair persecution,
Yes.
right? So my question is to you or anyone here in the audience, but particularly to our Muslim brothers and sisters, are we coming up with ways, are we coming up with a strategy to protect the Muslim community from unfair persecutions, harassments, surveillance, etc.? But what happened to the brother in Detroit, Imam in Detroit, and what's going on with people being in detention without trial or charge, Guantanamo in Cuba, which President Obama refuses to close, and the youngest person taken there was 15 years old at the time he was taken. I guess my question is, are we having meetings to defend our mosques and our other institutions in our community? Because right now, I think we can safely assume for the United States of America, every single mosque in this country, no matter how small or large, is under surveillance.
Yes, ma'am.
That's my question.
That's true. Thank you, sister. You raise an important point, and it's actually the point that I began my talk with. This stuff is only relevant if it has implications for our lives as individuals and our life as a community. And I think I wouldn't come just to be academic, to wax academic. It is a fact that the face of terror in America is now the black Muslim face. And I believe, my belief, dear sister, is that it is intentional. I believe it originated as a strategy in the context of a global war. A war to sustain white world supremacy and to arrest the rise of black humanity. I believe as part of the strategy, those fighting to sustain white world supremacy recognize Islam, especially Islam with a black face, as the #1 threat. History has recorded that the greatest threat to white supremacy has been Islam, but Islam with this black face.
Right, right.
And those who are fighting for white supremacy have schemed and plotted ways to neutralize the enemy combatants. And so I mentioned in the beginning of my talk that Newsweek article, the cover of which was the brother who was flying into Detroit and accused of trying to blow up the plane. And he is a black youth. And the cover announced that this black youth is the new son. He represents the new sons of bin Laden. So what that says is the real threat. Yes, I agree. Every masjid is bugged. But the real threat is that Muslim with the black face. And I suggest that the real threat is that Muslim who embraces the Islam of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Why? Because that is the Islam. The one is, from my perspective, is medicinal. It has the power to heal, but it also has the power, in my opinion, sister. It poses a significant threat to the aegis of white supremacy. Let me offer an example, if I may, and forgive me if I'm long-winded, but you raised a really important point. If this stuff is only academic, then it has minimal value. But in my opinion, my whole point, I believe what was said is critical to the life of the community. I believe a proper recognition a proper appreciation of Islam, especially as taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, right, is critical to the life of the community, because I think it's critical in this war. Allow me to give you an example. The number one enemy of white supremacy historically has been the black Muslim male, such that the coat of arms for the Habsburg family in 1700, white power family, was a coin with 4 black Muslim heads on it, surrounding the cross. These black Muslim heads were the heads of those princes that were killed in the 11th century by the King of Aragon, who fought the Moors, killed the Moorish princes, and made the coat of arms out of their heads. And in 1700, the Habsburg family used that coat of arms as their coat of arms, because the leading threat historically to white supremacy has been the black male. Now, if the black Muslim male, now if the black Muslim male is enemy combatant, then you're going to want to neutralize the enemy combatants. And so I suspect, I see this growing trend to feminize the black man as part of the strategy to neutralize the enemy combatant. So now our culture is metrosexual.
Come on.
Word. Go ahead.
So we are masking under the guise of liberalism, under the guise of a more enlightened black community. We are perpetuating the feminization of the black man through our music. We are not. The powers that be are. Through our music, through our television, or to feminize the black man. I see that in the context of this global war, white supremacy versus white supremacy versus the rise of black humanity. And in that context, I also see the demonization of Islam in the black community. There is a growing disdain for Islam among black intellectuals. That is why I focus on Dr. Chancellor Willams' The Destruction of Black Civilization. Because as great of a work as it is, it feeds, it is the Bible of black hate against Islam.
Yes, that's right.
It is the textbook of black hate against Islam. And so Islam is demonized now in the black community.
Come on.
And so my son, beloved, whose name is Islam, I named him Islam after the towers came down. I knew that he would get, I would not encourage him to apply to pilot school. I know he'd probably be disappointed. But I did not expect at that time that he would be coming up in a black community that was hateful of Islam. But it is so. But I think this demonizing of Islam in the black community is part of the strategy of the white supremacists. Because by keeping the last bastion, the last defense against the feminization of the black man is the Islam taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Yes, sir.
So long as Islam as taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is strong in the community, you can't feminize the black man.
Right.
But demonize Islam. Demonize Islam as taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in particular. Then the pathologies can be exacerbated. There's little fear that the medicinal value of what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught can heal the wounds of the community. The neutralization of the enemy combatant, number one, has no threat. You take Islam, you uproot Islam from the black community, then white supremacy has ultimately no real threat. So I think I bear you witness, sister, that the issue, the protection of the mosque, the protection of the Muslim community is real, but also suggests the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan warned us that upon his departure, the Muslim world, the broader Muslim world itself, will attack us with propaganda.
Right.
Hoping to break our relationship with Master Farad Muhammad. And so I fear that this trend to paint the face of black terror in America as a black face, it's not accidental. I think it was in the cards the whole time. And the Honorable Ms. Louis Farrakhan spoke of it right after they identified the Taliban as the enemy. He mentioned that Taliban means student. And we in the Nation of Islam, we have student enrollment. So the ultimate target was never Bin Laden. The ultimate target was never the masjids with American flags flying. The ultimate target was the mosque with the sun, the crescent, and the moon flying. The flag that Honorable Elijah Muhammad raised. That was the ultimate target of this war against terror. And I see that in the context of the war, white supremacy's war to sustain itself.
Indeed, indeed.
Teaching.
Did I answer your question?
No, but
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Wa alaikum salam. Last question.
Yes, sir. In the lines in which you just speaking of, a lot of youth are now accepting Islam in Washington, D.C. and
Praise belongs to Allah.
But, however, when we interact with the youth, a lot of them are being told to stay away from the Nation of Islam.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So,
yes, sir.
What's your view? Because you right on that, and just could you elaborate more dealing with the youth that are accepting Islam?
Yes, sir. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan identified early that the youthful generations, the generations that we've been producing since the ages 90s, is that warrior generation. And in as much as white supremacists, like Stoddard's circle, the real white supremacists, in as much as they have a vested interest in neutralizing our enemy combatants. And the greatest threat to white supremacy is that militant black Islam. I say black Islam meaning the Islam of the black man.
Right.
I'm not being chauvinistic. I'm talking in the context of war. The Islam of black manhood, in as much as it is enemy combatant number one, and in as much as this generation and the generation before, and I'm sure it will continue, is that warrior, are those warrior generations? Well, the last thing you want is for them to come under the healing of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's Islam. See, that other Islam, it's infected by white supremacy.
Right.
Even when the Muslim has a black face, Islam outside the context of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is infected with white supremacy.
Teach on
it's Aryanized, which is why other Muslims are deferential to immigrant Muslims, as if Islam is theirs, and that we have to ask permission to be Muslim, as if we have to ask permission to offer an interpretation of the Quran.
Right.
Because they have so blessed us with by allowing us to participate in their thing. See, that does not inspire the militancy of the black man. So that's safe. Let me just give you real. That's safe.
Right.
That's that safe Islam. Because that's that conquered Islam. It's that Aryanized Islam. But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's Islam is that Islam of Prophet Muhammad and more.
Right.
And just as the Islam given to Prophet Muhammad had the potency
to take this small group of ragtag black Arabs of the desert, who at that time hadn't known civilization for a long time, were forced to adapt to the desert, and they made the desert their life. They were savage on most accounts of civilization, but the Islamic prophet Muhammad received was so potent that it transformed a ragtag bunch of desert Arabs, and they overthrew the existing white power edifice, the two civilizations, the Byzantine Empire and the Sasanian Empire that had ruled most of the known world for 400 years. They had well-established armies, but on the cry of there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, this formerly ragtag bunch of Arabs overthrew the white power structure and established the greatest black empire that recorded history has seen. The Islamic empire under the four rightly guided caliphs and the Umayyads was the greatest in extent. Kemet was great, but Kemet's extent wasn't that of the Umayyad Empire. Its impact on the world was profound, all because a formerly ragtag bunch of desert Arabs, black desert Arabs, heard Muhammad's Islam. It was potent. It was that, but that was robbed of its soul by the Aryanization process. And that's the Islam that's in the world today. But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad came with that uncut raw.
Bring it home, bro.
He came with that potent Islam, and that's why he had the effect. He took ragtag bunch of desert dwellers.
Come on, man.
City desert dwellers.
Go ahead, God.
In America, and transformed them and erected the greatest nation within the nation the world has seen. So, yeah, it's very logical that they would dissuade the youth from this Islam and permit them to go to other Islam, because that Islam is not a threat. I'm sorry, they conquered that Islam.
Right.
So, thank you, beloved. I understand we will be signing books.
Better than that. Give this black man a round of applause. Asking the question, why are we in this condition? Others ask the question, are we ever going to get out of this condition? Some people ask the question, what is the true religion of God? Other people ask the question, who am I? What is my purpose in life? See, these are all secondary questions. The primary question is, who is God?
Sir.
Dr. Muhammad earned a BA in Religious Studies from Morehouse College, as well as a master's degree and a doctorate in Islamic Studies from the University of Michigan. He is the author of various books. I became introduced to Brother through his work. His very first book, an encyclopedia proving that the black man was God. And when I saw my brother reading it, I got a little suspicious, I must say. Because I said, I didn't see this published in the Final Call newspaper. What is this? And my brother said, you really need to read this book, because this book is dissecting and academically analyzing the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And after about 2 or 3 weeks after the brother finished the book, he allowed me to read it, and I read the introduction, and it was over from there. You will enjoy this brother's presentation, and most of all, you will learn. With no more from myself, please receive our dear beloved brother, scholar, friend, Dr. Wesley Muhammad.
In the name of Allah, who came in the person of Master Muhammad, whom all holy praises are forever due. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that the most honorable Elijah Muhammad is his living and yet exalted Christ. I further bear witness that in his absence, and by the permission of Allah, that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan sits in his seat today as a divine reminder to us all. Their names, I greet you, family, brothers and sisters, in the greeting words of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Brother Jalil, to Brother Askia, it is a humbling honor to share an event with you, beloved, and to speak about Islam in Black America. Then I can think of few other contributors to that discussion than Brother Askia. Thank you, beloved. I won't be long. My subject is the African origin of Islam. I have been on this subject for a little while now, such that some have raised the question, why am I still on this subject? Why is it necessary in 2010 to discuss the African origin of Islam? It is my belief that in 2010, the Black community is in a worse condition than we were 40 years ago.
Yes, sir.
It is my belief, it is actually my fear, as a father, a Black father in America, 2 Black children, a 10-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy, whom I will raise in the community in which I was born, the Black community. But it is a community beset with multiple pathologies.
That snow don't stop nothing. Snow don't stop the Black man from doing what needs to be done. And snow doesn't stop the spread of truth. Is that right or wrong?
That's right.
We can't stop because it's snowing. We can't stop because it's raining. We can't stop because it's thundering. We have to thunder truth. Is that right or wrong?
That's right.
We have to spread the truth regardless to whom or what. And so today, although we are few in numbers, we are high in spirit. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Are you high in spirit?
Yes, sir.
Are you happy to be here today?
Yes,
sir. You could have been any other place in America. You could have been in the bed eating a ham sandwich, but you are here at Blackburn Center about to hear a message from Brother True Islam. Give yourselves a round of applause. The Holy Quran opens up, brother and sister. The first commandment that Almighty God Allah gave to Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was to read, Iqra. The 96th surah of the Holy Quran is entitled The Clock. And it reads as follows: in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, read in the name of thy Lord who creates man from a clot. Read in thy Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he knew not. The Black man has been dead to the knowledge of himself for 400 years. He has been dead to the knowledge of others for 400 years. He was enslaved by his enslaver, enslaved master for 400 years and robbed of the knowledge of himself, robbed of the knowledge of his enemy, robbed of the knowledge of the sciences of nature, robbed of the knowledge and the love of himself and the love of his fellow brother and sister. But the scripture says, I will raise that people up and the last shall be the first, and the first shall be the last. For 150 years ago, you were enslaved, and we were inhibited from reading.
Yes, sir.
We were prohibited from writing. And if they found one among us who knew how to read, who knew how to write, they would kill him. And if they didn't kill him, they would ostracize him from the rest of the community. Allah commanded Prophet Muhammad to read, although he was illiterate. And Allah has commanded the black man and woman to read. Any people that do not read lack development.
That's right.
The highest form of reading, the highest form of writing is scholarship. And you know that you're dealing with an astute civilization, an astute society, and an astute people when you find scholarship among them. I'm very happy to say that we are growing and developing into an astute people.
Yes, sir.
We are growing and developing into the people of Almighty God. How do you know? Because scholarship is among us.
Yes, sir.
And the greatest scholar that is among us is the most honorable Elijah Muhammad and the honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And they have wonderful students. And one of their greatest students among us is a brother, a little brother that you may not know. But by the time the presentation is finished, you will know him very well. Because he is a brother that you should take very seriously. He is a brother who is academically dissecting the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And there's nothing wrong with dissecting the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teachings are true.
Right.
And anytime you dissect truth, you only get more and more truth from it.
Right.
And so we thank Almighty God Allah for our brother, Dr. Wesley Muhammad. Give him a well-deserved round of applause. Dr. Wesley Muhammad is the founder of Truth of God Institute, an educational research and resource center committed to providing scholarly and scientific discussion of the mother of all questions, who is God. That is the mother of all questions. There are secondary questions, and then there's a primary question. And all of the secondary questions serve as a foundation for the primary question. Some of us
pathologies that have not gotten better have gotten worse. And I lament the community that my children will inherit. In that regard, I am convicted that Islam, in particular, the Islam as taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, has medicinal value. Is medicine that can actually heal at least some of these pathologies.
Yes, sir.
They can actually better the community, but medicine, all medicine, regardless of its healing power, if not taken in a proper dose,
just want to make sure the sound is working.
is this better?
Oh,
yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All medicine, regardless of its medicinal or healing power, if not taken in a proper dose, if not taken according to the strict guidelines of the prescriber, will have minimal effect. It is my belief that there are those with a vested interest in keeping Islam, the medicinal Islam, or the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, away from those who need it most, away from the patient. Who would want to keep Islam from black people?
Good question.
Yathrop Stoddard, very important 20th century political scientist, He was influential as a political scientist in the 1920s. He was also a Harvard-trained historian. He was trained in Islamic studies in the around 1921, published an important work, The New World of Islam. Stoddard's primary fame, or infamy, as the case may be, is his work as a white supremacist. Stoddard published an influential work, 1924, The Rising Tide of Color Against White Supremacy. As a trained historian, as a political activist, and as a committed white supremacist, Stoddard was aware of the fact that white supremacy by that time was on the decline. And the leading threat to white supremacy then, as now, is the rise of black humanity. So Stoddard analyzed the situation historically, the situation of the decline of white supremacy and its potential eventual replacement by a restored black humanity. And Stoddard made recommendations as a political scientist, made recommendations on how to arrest the decline of white supremacy. In his book, The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy, Stoddard, the Harvard-trained historian and political scientist, knowledgeable in the history of Islam, makes this observation. Concerning Islam's steady progress in black Africa, there can be no shadow of a doubt. Every candid European observer tells the same story. Mohammedanism, says Charles Eliot, can still give the natives, the native peoples of the planet, black folk, can still give the natives a motive for animosity against Europeans. What is it about Islam that gives black folk an animosity against white folk? What was Stoddard aware of? 20 years ago, another English observer, T.R. Threefall, wrote, quote, "The rapid spread of militant Mohammedanism among the tribes to the north of the equator is a serious factor in the fight for racial supremacy in Africa. The scramble of Africa, the fight to control Africa, at some level became a racial war. And it was evident to those involved on one side of the aisle that Islam in Africa was a serious factor in that fight, that racial fight. Stoddard goes on to say, Islam as yet is unknown south of the Zambezi, but white men universally dread the possibility of its appearance. Let's reflect on this for a moment. A very important political scientist, Harvard-trained historian, trained in cultural history, and trained in the history of Islam in particular, who happens to be a committed white supremacist, who has a vested interest in the sustaining of white supremacy and operates within circles of those committed to sustaining white supremacy that was on the decline. In his circles, he became aware of the fact that white men universally dread Islam in Africa. Why is Islam? Why do white supremacists with power, with a vested interest. I'm not talking about the trailer park white supremacists. I'm not talking about the picket team white supremacists. I'm talking about the white supremacists with power, with a direct investment in sustaining the development, the decline of white supremacy. Why would they dread Islam among Africans? What do they know about Islam in Africa that causes them to dread its appearance among African peoples? And what does that have to do with the current movement in America to make Islam, especially Islam with the black face, public enemy number one? We live in a post 9/11 world. When those towers came down in New York, a paradigm shift occurred with regard to Islam. It became abruptly politically correct to be anti-Islam. But Osama bin Laden was marched out, and though he wasn't as light as the white Arabs that we were used to seeing, no one really confused him with a black American. So the backlash for 9/11, the so-called immigrant Muslim community felt the burden of most of it. It was immigrant Muslims, it was the Arab male in particular that was the enemy of the state. But if you have been following the news of late,
Yes.
or if you subscribe to news,
yeah. And now, our feature presentation.
Moving along in the program, I'd like to give you all a synopsis of what has been taking place on this campus amongst the believers since I say about 2007. Having taken careful notice of the absence that exists in society at large, but more specifically on the campus of Howard University, that is the absence of an effective organization whose sole mission is to restore black people and humanity back to divine glory. It is in that spirit that the Nation of Islam Student Association has reestablished itself on Howard's campus. There has been irrefutable evidence of the capability of the teachings of Islam as taught by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad to remedy the disease of white supremacy and reverse the behavior of one engaging in self-destruction. Operating in the midst of a dissatisfied populace, the Nation of Islam has rightfully earned a strong reputation for teaching and practicing pride, love, respect, protection, cleanliness, and a thorough knowledge of self. Howard University, at this particular dispensation of time that we are now living in, ought to become the real Mecca of not only black education, that of education in general. And if the nation's presence on this campus can aid in this process, then all credit should be given to the Supreme Being, God, Allah, the Most High. It is his humble yet mighty hopes of the NOISA to help to serve the student body by producing leadership, not followers, not slaves, not Negroes, not coons, but leadership that is inspired to build and establish institutions that will work to dignify black and oppressed people all over the planet. The only requirement, of course, to join the NOISA as a patron is to be committed to actively supporting the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his representative, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and the Nation of Islam. Despite alleged claims, you read in the media, they said Nation of Islam, we never supported, Jews, were anti-Semitic, or we hold disgraceful beliefs. I want you today to listen, to give some ear service to what we have to say, and you will see by the end of this meeting that none of this is true. The universal teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad under the guidance of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan will serve the students on Howard's campus regardless to race, creed, class, or color. And moving along in the program, I want to bring up a brother who's very dear to me. We're both from New Jersey. I knew this brother back when we were younger, man. We're still young. younger men at mosque number 25 back in Newark, New Jersey. And I used to see brother in the meetings, paying attention, listening with the other young brothers. And, I really, we was, talk, we exchanged, greetings of peace, but it wasn't until 2007 when I had seen brother on campus. I had just came back from a study abroad from Morocco, so my faith was real charged up. And I saw a brother, and he said, it's time to get to work. It's nation time. We need to start building this nation back on campus. And this brother I speak of is this illustrious brother, Brother Wesley Muhammad, and he's going to bring us into our next program on the campus today. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, brother.
Alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Good to see everyone out on a Saturday morning. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, the one true God, to whom all praises are due, the Lord of the worlds. We thank Allah for intervening in our affairs and coming in person, in the person of Master Farad Muhammad, traveling 9,000 miles from the holy city of Mecca, raising one up from among our midst as a divine leader, teacher, and guide, the one that we have come down to know to be the messenger of Allah, but one that we know now to be so much more, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. And we thank them both for the first right fruit of their union. Our friend, our brother, our champion in the cause of freedom, justice, and equality. The greatest brother that we have in our midst, simply. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And in their names and in the names of the righteous from the beginning of time until now, we offer unto you and extend the greeting words of peace and paradise. We say it in the ancient Arabic salutation of Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sir.
And how's everyone doing this morning?
Well, sir.
Brothers and sisters, it's indeed a pleasure to see you all out on a Saturday morning after what Obama calls Snowmageddon. I think that's what he called it. But we know